vision or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello and good evening. This is Don Swans, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 22nd issue of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Front page, here we are. It's an article by Michael Linton, whose article here that I'm about to read is adapted from the book From Mistakes to Meaning, Owning Your Past So It Doesn't Own You. This was written by Michael Linton and Joshua Steiner and is to be published by Avid Reader Press on February 24th. Well, I think that's today. So there we are. Okay. What the Sony cyber attack taught me about Hollywood and myself. People often make the worst professional mistakes when they find themselves acting on their basic emotion. Now, how do I know? I allowed it to happen to me. I considered myself a cool-headed executive until I made a choice that severely damaged my company and colleagues, all because I wanted to fit into Hollywood's creative community, unleashing one of the worst cyber attacks in corporate history. It exposed the confidential emails of insiders and put my own family at risk. Although the severity of what became known as the Sony hack was widely reported at the time, I've never told the story as it unfolded from my perspective. On November 24th, 2014, I drove my white Volkswagen GTI out of Brentwood toward Culver City, home of Sony Pictures. As I turned onto Bundy Drive, my phone rang. Dave Hendler, Sony's CFO, didn't even say hello. Michael, he said, we appear to have a major problem with our IT systems. All of our email systems are down. As he went on to explain that most of the company's computers appeared to be fried. I just listened and drove a little faster to work. By the time I walked into the Telberg building, I sensed that Sony had a very big problem. I found Hendler and Sony's head of IT, grown men, experts in their fields, veterans who did not get flustered, ever, except now. They looked scared and confused. The head of IT reported that 70% of Sony's servers were irreparably damaged. Sony could not make, edit, or release movies, use its email, or access its financial records or production systems. Over the next few days and weeks, the situation only worsened as the hackers released stolen emails that revealed terrible judgment, confidential scripts, and personal information. including my family's. Almost immediately, the FBI opened an investigation, and evidence suggested that the North Korean government likely led this attack as retribution and to quash the release of a film called The Interview, a Seth Rogen comedy about a bunch of journalists who make a screwball plan to eliminate the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Eight months later, after it became clear that the North Koreans had hacked Sony, and after the studio had lost its relationships with many of its important stars, including Will Smith, Adam Sandler, and Angelina Jolie, I spoke to President Obama about the whole incident. Unsurprisingly, he asked the right question. What were you thinking when you made killing the leader of a hostile foreign nation a plot point? Of course, that was a mistake. The mistake? My decision to greenlight a project on the fly. Before I explain how that decision got made and why it went so spectacularly off the rails, you need to know something about the sort of person I was before I arrived in Hollywood. When I was 9, my parents moved from Scarsdale, New York to Wassenaar in Holland. I did not speak the language and felt desperate to make friends. I fell in with a nerdy set, a small group of academically minded boys who carried their books in briefcases. We never got invited to parties. I can remember hearing loud music on a Saturday night from a neighboring house and knowing that many of my classmates were having fun without me. I found solace at the movies. Wassenaar's tiny theater managed to obtain all the current releases, and as I watched from a folding chair, I fell in love with the glamour and developed a secret, unexpressed ambition to be a part of that world. It took me a while to make it, but after stops at Penguin, Hollywood Pictures, and AOL, Howard Stringer, the CEO of Sony, called to offer me the job of running Sony Studios. Suddenly, my family had instant access to the hottest restaurants, invitations to the coolest parties and openings, great seats at the Oscars and Golden Globes. It felt as if that kid from Wassenaar had finally arrived. Or had I? There's always another velvet rope in Hollywood. No matter how exclusive the party, there's always a pecking order. And the coolest people, the actors, hang out in a room that's off limits. I once went to the home of Brian Lord, a powerful CAA agent, for his annual Oscar party. Daniel Craig, Leonard DiCaprio, and Sandra Bullock were all having a great time, drinking, laughing, singing. George Clooney, Brad Pitt, and Matt Damon stood in a tight circle, talking. I had seen Clooney at the studio that week and went up to join the conversation. While polite, they made clear that I simply did not belong. I was at the top of the heap in the movie business and still felt that I was watching from a folding chair in Wassenaar. Perhaps that's what left me so vulnerable and explains why, when I found myself deciding on a Seth Rogen project, I made the biggest mistake of my career. It's important to understand that Rogen had an existing relationship with Universal Studios, which caused a competitive situation when Sony began releasing his films. Both studios vied for his attention, time, and output. Two other factors complicated the situation. First, Amy Pascal, my co-chairperson at Sony, and Stacy Snyder, the chairwoman at Universal Studios, while friends, had a 20-year rivalry. Second, Rogen felt that he had to make each movie more and more outrageous to keep his audience engaged. So when either Tracy or Amy refused to greenlight a film because it was too offensive, the other agreed to make it. And guess what? It was inevitably a hit. Sony found itself in a difficult position of not being able to say no. And Rogen found himself in the enviable position of getting approval for almost anything that he chose to present. And so we requested a table read of the interview. If Seth wanted a fast decision to short-circuit the deliberative process through which the company made most decisions, we wanted to hear the cast read the script. Walking into the room, I immediately felt energized and simultaneously completely out of place. Although middle-aged, I had not lost the observational skills I had learned in middle school. I could quickly identify the cool kids and the ones eager for their approval. The actors wore T-shirts and jeans. Amy Pascal, the head of the studio, dressed casually in a green suede leather jacket, jeans, and fur-lined clogs. The rest of the studio's production executives were lower-budget versions of Amy's elegant attire. Me? I wore the same thing I did every day: a dark gray suit and a white shirt. I spotted Rogen sharing a joint with Franco in the corner. Rogen had a reputation as a smoker, but this time he may have needed a bit extra to calm his nerves. Everyone seemed jumpy. They all knew stakes. I was the suit in a room full of talent and needed to decide that day whether Sony would back Rogen and Franco on their next great adventure. I knew that what reads funny on the page does not always read funny in the room. Laughter would determine whether we committed tens of millions of dollars and months of their lives to the project. As soon as the actors started reading, their collective nervousness disappeared. They were hilarious. Rogen and Franco had ad-libbed and drew out the best in their fellow actors and made the rest of the room feel as if they were part of their joyous adventure. When the reading was over, Amy jumped up and said, "Let's make this." I threw out all our normal, careful approval processes and found myself agreeing. We rushed into the decision giddy about the project, thrilled to have outflanked our competition at Universal Studios, and alas, oblivious to the potential ramifications. I didn't realize it at the moment, or I would have shouted, "Hold on, let's think this through." Not long after the hack, a mysterious website appeared inviting journalists to type "Die Sony" into an internet browser, where they could find tens of thousands of leaked emails in which studio executives criticized movie stars, emails that had sensitive employment contracts. Then the hackers started releasing employee health records and social security numbers. They published pirated versions of upcoming movies such as The Karate Kid. They even released the confidential script of the new James Bond movie. That's the ultimate Hollywood sacrilege. As part of the leaked document, my daughter's health records flashed across the internet. The result was mayhem. Between the constant press coverage of the confidential emails the destroyed IT system and the panic over the employee identity theft, the studio became paralyzed. For the next 5 months, the cleanup consumed my life. And after much forensic investigation, the FBI shared my speculation that the North Koreans had led the attack. Confirmation came later when they actually took credit. The North Koreans didn't exactly love the interview. They didn't love how it satirized their leader, let alone that it ended with his assassination. The summer before the hack, as Sony began pre-release publicity for the movie, there were warnings that the North Koreans objected to it, but no indication that they would take extreme actions to prevent its release. Should I have handled those warnings differently? Should I have canceled the movie? There was no precedent for a studio pulling a movie due to the objections of a dictator, and none of the experts warned me of potentially dire consequences. When Sony said it wouldn't back down on releasing the film, the North Koreans threatened the movie theaters. We were opposed to release the movie with millions of dollars spent on marketing when all the major theater companies refused to show it. Conversely, the actors and filmmakers pushed hard for its release. I agreed with the filmmakers' objective, but felt that they showed insufficient concern for the threats to their theater partners. In truth, we got very little support from the Hollywood community. The only person I remember being brave enough to speak out publicly on our behalf was George Clooney. Eventually, we released the movie over the internet, working with Google and Stripe. No other platforms or software companies agreed to help. We did something for the first time. A direct delivery of a movie by a studio to a viewer's home. After the hack, I experienced numbness punctuated only by feelings of anger and shame. I felt angry at Julian Assange, who created a wiki of all my emails to make them easily searchable. Angry at the press, who dumpster dived into the wiki, and angry at public officials and industry leaders who didn't defend Sony. Curiously, I never really got angry at the North Koreans on the assumption that if you kick the hornet's nest and get stung, you can't really blame the hornets. For many years, I buried it all. The anger, the embarrassment, the shame, the pain of my family endured. Now I've come to believe that the whole affair neither began with the ill-fated table read nor ended with my buried feelings. It ultimately came down to a basic human truth. Our desire to belong leads us all to weigh heavily the opinions of others. During the table read, I watched as all other participants saw the script one way. Brilliant comedy that built on previous successes of a particular genre. Just for a moment, I wanted to join the badass gang that made subversive movies. For a moment, I wanted to hang as an equal with the actors. I had grown tired of playing the responsible adult, of watching the party from the outside while I played Risk. Now, years later, I find it ironic that while I had requested the table read to understand what emotions the script would elicit in an audience, I had not bothered to examine my own emotional state when walking into that room. My middle school self took over, and my adult self lost the courage to disappoint the other kids. The party got out of hand, and the company, its employees, my family and I, all paid dearly. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And now, going in another direction, following that article, the review places a contribution by Olivia Empson on the page entitled "EV Magazine Gives a Conservative Cosmo for the Cultural Vibe Shift." Named for a modern version of the Bible's original woman, EV aims to reach an audience of church-going, city-dwelling, working young mothers. The sound of Billie Eilish drifted overhead as candles flickered along every visible surface of Boom, the penthouse lounge crowning the Standard Hotel in Manhattan's meatpacking district. Women in sequin trailing gowns sauntered past the pink vaulted bar, ordering cocktails with names like Decent Proposal and French Kiss. Chrome platters heaped with cigarettes lay behind red velvet ropes, and waiters with trays of canapes made the rounds. This was the first live event for EV Magazine, which bills itself as a conservative Cosmo for young women with traditional values. Coinciding with Valentine's Day weekend and New York Fashion Week, the evening's theme was romance and beauty. Men arrived in suits, women mostly in heels and sparkly dresses. At its peak, the venue was buzzing with more than 250 attendees. Thanks for coming out for Fashion Week. We're definitely mugging every other event, announced Gabriel Hugaboom, using a slang term for visibly upstaging. His wife and fellow EV co-founder, Brittany Hugaboom, beaming in a glittering leopard print dress, interjected, "We started with a mission to embrace femininity, and we were definitely ahead of the curve for a couple of years," she said. Founded in 2019 and named for a modern take on the Bible's original woman, Evie has struck a cultural nerve, animating young conservatives eager to make the movement feel fashionable and drawing detractors who believe its anti-feminist message is regressive. Brittany Hugaboom, the face of the brand, holds that the magazine is feminine, not feminist. After Donald Trump's re-election, conservative values have been expressed more openly in liberal-leaning cities like New York. For this cohort, dressing well, hosting social events, and embracing criticism has become a way to seize ground in a shifting media landscape. Evie started for women who didn't feel represented by the mainstream media. For women who love beauty, romance, aspiration, said Hugaboom, 34. I didn't have another outlet to get it from at that time. On Evie, a reader can scroll from 7 iced Starbucks dupes with a fraction of the calories, to meditations on the health risks of hormonal birth control and vaccines that skirt any of the benefits. The site's imagery, replete with barrel curls, pink cowboy boots, and milkmaid dresses, sketches an ideal of a modern conservative woman, a church-going, city-dwelling young mother who was employed and upwardly mobile. As trusting news media continues to plummet, new conservative outlets focused on young audiences have flourished. The manosphere's pioneers, Joe Rogan, Aidan Ross, Charlie Kirk, have provided an effective business blueprint for their female counterparts. Rogan signed a reported $250 million deal with Spotify in 2024, while Ross claimed he earned up to 5 figures an hour for streaming online. Evie and its contemporaries stepped in to fill the gender gap. I grew up watching Ben Shapiro on YouTube and his debates, and I felt like the Republican movement was just a lot of men in big leather chairs smoking cigars. The conservative commentator Brett Cooper, 24, said at the party, in a floor-length dress standing next to her husband, "As an 18-year-old girl, I didn't really see myself in those 45-year-old men." Political media has shifted, and there's more women's voices that are part of the conversation. And it's fantastic, said EV contributor Allison Cheperdeck, who was an assistant staff secretary for President Trump during his first term. I love seeing women defining success in their own way, whether it's having a family or having children and working. Evie aims to not only reach the new conservative woman, the Carolyn Levitts and Kayleigh McEnany's of the world, it wants to teach those curious or uncommitted how to become one. She walks into a room and all the guys are in awe of her. She is effortlessly beautiful. Like this Marissa Miller, Margot Robbie type of woman, Hugo Boom said, describing the ideal Evie girl. She's kind and generous. She doesn't even notice how magnetic she is, and she just absolutely adores her husband. She's the epitome of a woman in many ways. Hugo met her husband at 18 while attending the University of Dallas. The couple have 2 children and now live in New York City. In addition to leading Evie, they also run the period tracking app 28, which makes fitness recommendations based on the phase of a woman's menstrual cycle. A spokesperson for Evie described the outlet as social first, noting that Instagram and TikTok serve as the gateway to its content, with engagement rates that rival and even outperform those of legacy giants. The brand receives roughly 175 million views across all platforms each month and counts 192,000 Substack followers, the spokesperson said, but declined to disclose total digital paid subscribers. According to SimilarWeb, a data firm that traffics web traffic, Evie's website drew 364,476 visits in January. By comparison, in the same period, Vogue had nearly 16 million monthly visits. Cosmopolitan, 27.5 million, and LA, 31 million. Cooper's YouTube page, meanwhile, has about 1.7 subscribers. Alex Clark, 32, who hosts the Maha-friendly podcast Culture Apothecary, said she gets roughly 2.5 million downloads a month. There has been a real opportunity in the conservative media space since 2016 for women, Clark said. A few of us were smart to capitalize on that very early. Evie is privately funded. The company generates revenue through subscriptions, merchandise, and branded content. And the Hugo Boom say it is profitable, with all earnings being reinvested into growth. It publishes 1 print issue a year and places most of its focus on digital. We've intentionally avoided being an ad-driven business. Most magazines are 95% ads, 5% original content, and we flipped that on its head, the Evie spokesman said. In previous print issues of Evie, there have been advertisements for 28, the app that Hugo Boom founded in 2022. They received $3.2 million in seed funding, led by Peter Thiel's Thiel Capital, according to Crunchbase. A representative for Thiel did not respond to requests for comment. On the homepage of 28's website, Brittany is pictured, hair flowing, wearing bathing suits on a beach. At the party, a shriek came from the VIP section after a woman realized she'd backed into flame and that her hair was on fire. Later on, the Hugo Booms gathered around a red velvet curtain adorned with swooping orchids to reveal a new edition of Evie, which they called the sex issue. Guests murmured as they took on the cover, which featured a brunette Evie girl dressed up as a corseted boudoir-ready bride. A lot of our readers have requested this issue, Brittany said. It's probably the best issue on the subject. Turning around, we're now looking at this title. These schools want to foster civil discourse on campus. Even that is up for dispute. On the evening of January 15th, 26 undergrads gathered for dinner in a common room at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to debate the fairness of college admissions post-affirmative action. The ground rules were clear. Nothing they said would leave the room. Nobody would be shouted down, and no one would get ratted out on the social media as problematic. The students went at it with gusto. First years from Hungary and Turkey lamented the systems in their home countries, where admission is based purely on standardized tests rather than their interest or extracurriculars. A black student from in-state criticized admissions based on test scores and GPAs for different reasons, given sharp disparities in secondary schools and family resources. Some kids were already at a disadvantage. A couple of students praised the end of affirmative action, which they described as inherently unjust. The dinner officially wrapped up after an hour. But rather than dash out, most students stuck around, continuing the discussion in small clusters. A lot of us have memories from college of late-night conversations debating every topic under the sun. And a lot of students have felt as though that's missing. UNC's Chancellor Lee Roberts said in an interview, "Students today," he explained, "are looking for a chance to debate a topic without debating whether you've somehow said the wrong thing." All this was taking place at CivCon, a residential hall affiliated with a program at UNC called the School of Civic Life and Leadership. Skills, S-C-I-L-L. The school, which opened in 2023, is part of a larger nationwide larger nationwide civic thought movement led by a mix of political conservatives, academic traditionalists, and liberals alarmed by progressive overreach. The goal is to push back on what proponents see as an academic culture that has lost sight of the purpose of a liberal arts education, and to do so from within the university. On many campuses, they've encountered strong resistance. Faculty at these schools tend to hail from the humanities and weigh heavily toward disciplines that have fallen out of favor with both professors and students, including military history, intellectual history, political theory, Shakespeare, and ethics. Classes look a lot like college in an earlier era. More great books and Socratic method, less arcana and critical theory. Courses at Skill focus on primary sources, discussion and note-taking on actual paper. One of the most popular is called Pursuing the Good Life this semester, and the readings included the Bible, Plato, Rousseau, Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky, along with poetry by Sylvia Plath and music by Beethoven. Interviews with over a dozen students who had taken its class were overwhelmingly positive. They described Skill's offerings as freeing, eye-opening, and challenging, and stimulating. For me, the appeal of Skill classes is the emphasis on intellectual curiosity, productive disagreement, and class discussion, said Kara Allen, a junior who transferred to UNC from a community college. In her first Skill class, Allen said, there were definitely people who signed up to play devil's advocate in what they assumed would be a conservative class. In the end, she said, they seemed absolutely won over. At CivCom, discussions are governed by an agreed-upon set of rules, as one student put it. While residents might strongly disagree, they must still live with one another and borrow each other's milk. Her experiences there have made it hard to put people in boxes and helped her recognize their inherent goodness, even though they have different beliefs. According to surveys, students find most of the reasons for self-censorship comes from other students. And Jed Atkins, Skills Dean and Director, said the idea here is to face that challenge head-on. Students in these dorms are friends, not despite of, but because of their differences. But differences of opinion over skill have inflamed the broader UNC campus, where pushback is palpable. Skill, like a dozen other schools of civic thought reestablished by Republican-led legislatures at public universities in red and purple states, have unusual autonomy. It can hire faculty, often with the explicit aim of diversifying political and intellectual viewpoints, set curriculum and other classes. This has led to turf battles and to intense debate. Interviews with dozens of ardent supporters of the civic thought movement and their equally passionate critics offer a portrait of a movement as fraught and acrimonious as academia itself. The university has always been a political environment, said Timothy Messer-Cruz, a professor of cultural studies at Bowling Green State University. and a vocal critic of schools of civic thought. But what this movement is doing is using the law to advance a political ideology which is contrary to core conservative and American values. All the talk about increasing intellectual diversities is just a fig leaf. It's DEI for the right. Even before COVID lockdowns and Gaza-related protests, a national civics education movement had begun in American universities, from Harvard University to the University of California at Davis. Predating the Trump administration's efforts to bring American academia to heel, the burgeoning of civic education movement was already trying to unwoke universities on its own. There are now 45 civic centers at private and public universities in the U.S., according to a recent report by Heterodox Academy, an organization that advocates for viewpoint diversity on campuses. Creating schools within schools at public universities like the one at UNC has been one of the more ambitious strategies. Among these, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University was the first to open in 2017. Similar programs have been established by Republican-led legislatures at roughly a dozen universities, including Ohio State, University of Florida, and the University of Tennessee, not at Knoxville. Their budgets range from $1.5 million for the University of Iowa to $100 million at the University of Texas at Austin. Though the schools vary in structure and scope, they tend to share certain goals: to reel in the excesses of the culture wars, to revive the humanities outside a critical lens, to recommit to ideals that have made a strong liberal arts education fundamental or foundational to American democracy. Critical thinking, dialogue, pluralism, the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, for example. The hope is that once students understand what binds a community together, they might develop a campus culture that respects and encourages differences of opinion. Many of the civic thought movement goals jibe with those of the Trump administration. Last summer, the Department of Education announced it would give funding priority to scholars from universities that established independent academic units dedicated to civic thought, constitutional studies, American history, leadership, and economic liberty. And last month, the National Endowment for the Humanities awarded a $10 million matching grant and $100,000 in outright funds to UNC's skill. This outpouring of funds has sounded alarm bells for critics who see these new centers as depriving attention from disciplines that have simultaneously seen a decrease in support. In their view, the schools are an effort by Republicans to bludgeon universities into hiring conservatives. The universities themselves often see the new schools as duplicative and unnecessary. They already have departments covering government philosophy and American history. Another common critique is that Any center mandated by the legislative amounts to outside interference and is inherently invalid. A silly claim, said Neil Gross, a professor at Colby College who studies the politics of higher education. Public universities have always had to be responsive to the state's priorities. A third is that funding from outside donors, which many of these schools have received, sometimes from conservative foundations, is inherently suspect and politicized. Also, a straw man, Gross explained, universities have long created programs out of pet causes by major donors. A more legitimate concern, he said, is whether the schools will carefully vet and adhere to the institution's same standards in hiring quality faculty and not ideologues. Critics on UNC Chapel Hill's campus say that Atkins, who had run a similar program at Duke, has overwhelmingly hired political conservatives and religious Christians. Skilled faculty do not apply political or religious litmus tests to faculty or staff hiring, Atkins has said in response. We're removing litmus tests, not adding them. Currently, 22 faculty members teach at Skill, but turnover has been intense. Atkins fired one of the school's deans. Another resigned. In his resignation letter from Skill's Advisory Board, economics professor John Williams described incivility and dysfunction, biased and unfair processes, a complete disregard for governance, and a willingness to deceive and misrepresent that is unlike anything I've witnessed in my 15 years in academia. Chris Clemens, UNC's provost, also abruptly resigned. He is now suing UNC and its board of trustees. Clemens declined to comment. In September, UNC's chancellor announced an independent investigation into Skill that would involve a thorough policy and process review. And that process is ongoing. Though some on campus have interrupted these events as evidence of woke professors ganging up on a political project, in interviews, former Skill faculty members said their objections were managerial rather than ideological. Several expressed disappointment in the execution of a project they considered both worthy and necessary. At the December opening of the University of Iowa's Center for Intellectual Freedom, where the conservative author and activist Christopher Rufo was a keynote speaker, neither the president of the university, Barbara Wilson, who was in Indianapolis for a meeting of the Big Ten, nor the provost, Kevin Cagle, showed up. The Iowa legislation had stipulated that the Civic Thought program bypass university leadership and report directly to the Board of Regents instead. Both Wilson and Kriegel declined to be interviewed. The University of Iowa is committed to ensuring a diverse set of viewpoints in our campus, Kriegel said in a provided statement, which aligns with the goals of the center. We're laying the foundation for a new generation of Americans who are knowledgeable about the history of their country, appreciative of its values and traditions, and above all, committed to its legacy of freedom, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds announced in the center's opening ceremony. Muslim students on campus were approached by Skill and encouraged to take the class, which made many students feel targeted. Because of their experiences during the university's crackdown on campus and encampments, some Muslim and Arab students felt the class would make them unsafe. Many are not willing to talk about these issues because they know if they were to express their real opinions, they would face punishment. Though the MSA took no official position, a number of Muslim and Arab students urged boycotting the class, which includes a student trip to Israel and the West Bank. Flyers distributed around campus labeled it a genocide field trip. Another student organization, Transparent Unity, has organized teaching opposition to the school. Your participation in these classes only continued to fund the cancerous growth of Skill, warned an Instagram account. We can study and appreciate Western intellectual tradition, challenge it from a variety of critical and anti-colonial perspectives, and do both those things while simultaneously rejecting Skill. This kind of pushback is both frustrating and emblematic of the problems in the school that the school is trying to solve, said Rita Carcassonne, a political scientist who teaches a class in Skill called Left to Right and Center, the History of American Political Ideologies. Carcassonne read aloud one of her student reviews. I'm grateful for the way it pushed me this semester. It forced me to slow down, read more carefully, take arguments seriously even when they weren't coming from a place I was comfortable with. That shift has already changed how I think about my work going forward. This, she said, is a proof of the civic thought movement's potential. If you don't have undergrads who value rigorous thought, she said, then what you end up with is a race to the bottom. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 22nd issue of the Wall Street Journal Review. We read from the Wall Street Journal Review every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Your reader this evening has been Don Swans. I thank you for listening. I truly mean that. Thank you very much. And I certainly hope that next week, at the same time, we'll see you at the same place on the dial of the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Good night now.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service with the New York Times. Following that at 9 o'clock, we have Fortune Magazine. And at 10 o'clock, we have episode number 3 of The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 14227. Any questions on Dash's tapes for radio reading? Call us at 716-821-5555, and thanks for caring. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another